Hey guys, welcome back. We just wanted to do a little video today. Kind of wanted to have a chat info session about tomatoes and the different kinds. I had somebody ask me a question the other day that really made me realize that there's just not a whole lot of information available out in the world about this unless you go looking for it. So I wanted to go ahead and record this in case it helped anybody. Okay, so we're talking about tomatoes. The first thing I'd like for everybody to understand is there are two different types of tomato plants. There's a determinate type or a bush type of tomato plant, and then there's an indeterminate type of tomato plant that is a vining tomato plant. There are 5 different sizes of tomato plants. Most people know cherry grape and then the big old slicers, or sometimes they're called beef steaks that you can get to put on a sandwich. There are also, so I'm going to say them in order of size, smallest to largest. Currant tomatoes. Currant tomatoes are typically about 1/2 inch. They're smaller than even cherry tomatoes. They're even sweeter. There's not a whole lot of purpose for them besides snacking, but they are typically very sweet and delicious. Second, of course, is cherry tomatoes. Cherry tomatoes are also very small, very sweet. Cherry tomatoes are really good in pasta salad, or you can cut them up and bake them. Sometimes they're really good mixed in with other things. A lot of people use cherry tomatoes for like a mozzarella style balsamic mix salad. Then you have the grape size, which is slightly bigger than the cherry, and usually they're elongated. The cherries are very round. The grapes are very grape shaped. Excuse the dirt fingers. We just got done digging in the garden and I don't wear gloves. Then you have the saladette or plum size. Saladettes are the ones that are typically about 2.5, 3 inches, not big enough necessarily for a slicer, not too small to slice, but not big enough to be considered a slicer or a beef steak. Also included in those are Roma tomatoes, or even some paste tomatoes are in that size group. Then you have the slicers or the beef steaks. Those are the big guys. Those are the ones that are very meaty. You slice them up, you put them on a tomato sandwich. They're typically very delicious, very full of flavor. So now I want to go over the pros and cons of each kind of tomato plant. I will tell you that I prefer to grow indeterminate tomato plants. I do like to do currant, cherry, the saladette sizes and slicers. So pretty much I'll grow any size of tomato. We do enjoy them in all shapes and sizes. So determinates. The pros of growing a determinate is that they are very great for small spaces. Okay, so the pros of growing determinate tomatoes. Determinate tomatoes, from sprouting, I want to say from birth, but obviously that's not correct. From sprouting, a determinate tomato already knows how big it's going to get and how many fruit it's going to produce. So that makes them amazing for a small space. They're good container plants. They're good patio plants. They're good plants if you want to grow them in the green stock and you don't have a way to support them. Determinate tomatoes are great for those type situations. They typically don't need a whole lot of support. They might need a stake, depending on which kind you get. They may need a small cage around them specifically, but they won't need as much as an indeterminate will. One good thing, or it could be a bad thing depending on how you look at it, if you're going to use your tomatoes for canning, this actually makes them pretty spectacular. All of the fruit ripens at the same time. So the plant grows to the size that it's going to grow. It sets all the flowers it's going to set. It sets all the fruits that it is going to set. Then they all ripen at the same time. If you know anything about canning, or you've done canning a lot in your life, you know that that is pretty significant. And makes things a lot easier for the canner because everything's ready all at one time. Now, if you're not intending upon canning, say that you prefer to freeze them, or you're going to eat them fresh, or you're going to sell them, maybe that's not the best way for them to go, because you're going to have a lot of ripe fruit right at the same time. So keep that in mind. They do typically have less maintenance. You're not going to do as much pruning on a determinate plant. Once it gets so big, you're going to prune a lot of the just leaf branches off. It doesn't take as many leaves as it produces for it to get the sunlight that it needs to photosynthesize. That's a mouthful. And you want airflow to the plant. So you are going to cut a lot of the only leaf branches off. Now, if there's flowers on it, with it not going to produce any more flowers, I would not cut those off. So the cons of a determinate plant: it only sets a certain number of fruit. That might be good for you. That, for me, is not what I want. I want my plant to continue setting fruit for as long as it's going to be alive. You're going to get all your fruit at the same time. That could be a good thing. That could be a bad thing. You'll only have one harvest typically, sometimes two, but most of the time you only get one harvest. So you may have to replant them after you get the harvest. You'll have to pull a perfectly good plant that is not going to give you any more fruit out of the ground and plant another one, which means that when you're starting seeds, you need to make sure that you've started a second round of seeds that are not going to get too big before you can put them in the ground. So they can't just be you double up when you first start them. Then they're going to be too big and they're not going to be happy in the small pots that you have them in. So that's about it for determinate plants. Like I said, there's good things and there's bad things about them. I don't prefer determinate plants just because, number one, my way of preserving most of the time is going to be freezing. And I'm also going to have a large amount of plants. So even if I wanted to can them, I will have fruit coming off of multiple plants that I can can all at the same time. So that goes on to indeterminate plants. You're going to want to prune your indeterminate plants. 1, airflow. That is a big reason why you prune. 2, because they're going to get suckers. Now, suckers are essentially what looks like a second plant coming out of a corner, coming out of the knee of the plant, I guess would be a way of saying it. So you have your main branch coming up, you've got a leaf branch coming out the side of the main branch, and right here in this little corner, you'll see little leaves start to sprout. Now, if you let that get too big, it will start pulling energy away from the main vine of the plant. It will also start going very wild and hard to maintain and keep in a certain way. It's going to lower airflow depending on where it is. That could be a problem that ends up with your plant getting blight or getting sick. If you wait till they're about this tall and you pull them off, you can actually stick them in a cup of water and get them to root, and you will have a second planting of tomatoes if your season allows for that to happen. They do not do well in container gardens. If you were going to find a way to support them, you could make it work. But typically an indeterminate tomato plant is going to be best done in either large raised beds or in the ground. You're going to get to harvest more often. So you're not going to get one huge harvest from these plants. You're going to get maybe 2 fruits today, maybe skip tomorrow and you'll have another fruit ripe the next day. But you're probably going to get fruit off of this plant multiple times a week until it gets sick and dies. They don't just stop growing. They continue to vine as long as they have support and they're alive and healthy. They are great for fresh eating. If you're going to be eating it as it comes out of the garden, indeterminate plants are amazing for that because they're going to trickle in, but they're going to be a steady trickle. There are much more varieties of indeterminate tomatoes than there are of determinate tomatoes. So if you are like me and you want to see a tomato of many colors, then you really are best off to do indeterminate tomato plants if that is possible for your situation. The cons of an indeterminate tomato plant. You will have a lot of pruning to do. You will have to check on them at least every other day. Suckers grow quick. If you don't and you just let them run wild, you will get sick tomato plants. A lot of times you will end up having fruit sitting on the ground, which means that it is much more susceptible to animals, insects, things that want to eat the fruit just like you do. It'll also be susceptible to rot, to just being forgotten, because you can't see it under the massive bush of leaves. So that is something to keep in mind. If you're going to grow indeterminate tomato plants, you need to have some kind of support trellis system planned out. If you trellis it over your head, then you can just pick the tomatoes typically. If you're going to do a wall of support, that'll work as well. There are many, many options. Some people do strings, some people do stakes, and they keep it very specifically pruned to one main bush. Just keep that in mind. It's not the best option if you're just going to have like 2 tomato plants. If you want to preserve, indeterminate tomato plants are not your option for this. They're not going to come in all at the same time and make plenty of tomatoes at one time for you to do all the sauce that you want. You're going to get 2 or 3 maybe at a time if you only have a couple of plants, and preserving is going to become more difficult if you prefer to can. Now, if you're going to do frozen, then it doesn't make a difference. There's a lot more maintenance with indeterminate plants than there is with determinate plants. After determinate plants get to whatever size they're going to be, you're not going to be pruning them anymore. You're going to take the leaves off in a few places where they're good and airy, and then you're going to let them sit. An indeterminate plant, you're going to be out there every few days pulling suckers off of that plant for as long as that plant is alive. Now, there are many different ways to use your tomatoes as they come in, whether you do determinate or indeterminate. Some work better with a specific kind of plant, some work better with the other kind of plant. So canning, I've mentioned this a couple of times. Canning is going to be best done by a determinate plant or several indeterminate plants, whichever you prefer to do. But if you plan on canning your tomatoes, typically determinate's going to be a better option for you. Freezing, you can do either or. The best way to freeze a tomato, if you're not going to be already processing it, is to actually cut an X in the bottom of the tomato, take the stem off the top, and stick it in a bag. You do not need to go ahead and peel them before you put them in there. You put them all in a bag, you gather them throughout the summer or as they come in, or there's more than you can use at one time. And then at the end of the summer, you let them thaw out. You can actually pull the skin and push the tomato meat and seeds out. The skin will peel off like it's nothing. And then you continue to preserve them. It does not affect the taste typically. You can also dehydrate tomatoes. A lot of people really like dehydrated tomatoes. You can sun-dry tomatoes. There's a lot of options for what you can do. With those, if you dehydrate your tomatoes, you do not have to store them in a freezer. You do not have to store them in a refrigerator. You can actually dehydrate them, put them in a very tightly sealed jar, and put them in the pantry.
Hey Mama, is it time for lunch yet?
I mean, not quite yet. What are you wanting to have?
I want lettuce.
Lettuce? Just lettuce? I think we should have taco nachos.
Yeah.
Okay.
And lettuce.
Can I finish my video though?
Yes.
Give me just a minute.
Okay.
All right. So your next question may be, how do I know if my tomato is going to be a determinate or indeterminate? Sometimes you can look on the labels if you buy starts at the store. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can look on the back of your seed packet if you're starting them yourself. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can look at the leaves on the plants. Typically, a determinate plant is going to have a much broader leaf, more area that would collect sunlight, so to speak. It looks more like a bush leaf than a vine leaf. If you notice, vine leaves are typically pretty narrow. The best option is to just get on Googly.
Googly?
Googly. Don't we use Googly?
Yeah.
What do you call it?
Google.
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 And you just type in, is my blue cream berry tomato plant determinate or indeterminate? Is my burpees big bush boy determinate or indeterminate? For the record, the first one's indeterminate, the second one was determinate. That's the best way to find out. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a great day.
And a great week.
And we hope that your cup runneth over.
Click subscribe! Nailed it.